but it takes some of the pressure off to know that this reality is not everything. It's not even close to everything.
When it comes to self-development, no matter the method you use, the vital point is to practice. If you're ready to transform your life and claim the potential inside of you, then you're in the right place. Welcome back to The Vital Point. I'm your host, Jonathan Schechter. As an integrative specialist and breathwork facilitator, I'm invested in making the dynamic landscape of personal evolution accessible. My goal is to inspire you to take action for yourself. You have the capacity to evolve and bring your intentions and dreams into the world, and there's never been more access to so many incredible modalities that can help you on your journey. This podcast will help you learn simple methods you can use to transform your life and share the stories of practitioners who are doing the work so that you feel inspired to go and practice, because that's the vital point. If you're enjoying the show, please leave us a 5-star review. Go ahead and follow on whatever platform you're listening on. It's an easy, free way to support the show and help more people discover these simple, life-changing practices. If you're enjoying the show, please follow on whatever platform you're listening on. Leave us a 5-star review. It's an easy, free way to support the show and help more people discover these simple, life-changing practices. Really appreciate your support. My guest on this special episode is Henry Winslow. Henry is the founder of Tricycle Day, a free twice-a-week newsletter covering the top stories in psychedelic research, policy, and business. And it's actually fun to read. It's very entertaining. It's written in a very accessible way that I just keep coming back to again and again. And I feel very fortunate to know Henry. We met just a little bit over a year ago, and his newsletter had 3,000 subscribers, and now he's up to somewhere above 38,000, which is just amazing. And I'm super happy for him and his continued growth. And we ran into each other at the Psychedelic Science Conference last year in Denver. He asked me to lead breathwork as part of the first Tricycle Day Integration Club, where we did yoga and breathwork and meditation and integration. And more recently, Henry asked me to put together a course to publish through Tricycle Day called High on Your Own Supply, Psychedelic Breathwork for Self-Connection, Energy Regulation, and Mystical Experiences. And I was just so thrilled to be able to share what I do in my breathwork sessions online and with my private coaching clients in the form of a course. So depending on when you're listening to this podcast, the course is in pre-sale with a nice discount. And even if you're listening to it and the course is already launched, if you use the code that I'm going to put in, you will greatly benefit me as well as an affiliate. High on Your Own Supply teaches psychedelic breathwork. It also teaches methods for preparation and integration, how to use your breath to get more clarity, to be more present with your psychedelic work, your preparation, your integration. I put protocols for starting a breathwork practice, using breathwork around a psychedelic or plant medicine journey. And, you know, Henry pointed out during our conversation that the methods and practices that I go over in this course are applicable to anyone, you know, in any walk of life. But I've really been enjoying the fact that I can be at this intersection of breathwork and psychedelic integration, because that's what's helped me. And so I'm just super grateful to be able to share this course. There's 5 different guided practices. There's Spotify playlists. And I put together over 3 hours of instruction and information about using breathwork for psychedelic integration, holotropic principles, and how the work of Dr. Stan Groff can deepen your own psychedelic work. Using your breath is one of the best things that you can do for psychedelic work, for entering into expanded states of consciousness, as well as supporting your integration. And, you get so much in this course. You'll have a clearer understanding of the science of breathing and really understand what each type of breath is doing for you. You get a suite of tools for psychedelic integration. You get a practical take on meditation that you might not have considered, so that you can actually start and continue to have this practice that can benefit so many different parts of your life, as well as the way to breathe so that you can enter psychedelic states with just your breath. You can get high on your own supply. So, all of this, I'm so excited to share with you. If you go to breath.tricycleday.com, that's breath.tricycleday.com, and use the code Jonathan, my name, Jonathan, at checkout. If we're within the first couple of weeks of launch, you'll get a nice discount on the course. And even if you're listening to this a while after the course has been released, if you use that code Jonathan at checkout, it greatly helps me as creator with working with Tricycle Day. So I really appreciate using that code Jonathan at checkout for breath.tricycleday.com. Super grateful to continue to know Henry and to have had the chance to sit down with him to have this conversation. We talk about his experience with yoga and how that can be a spiritual path, and then how his yoga practice and some of his psychedelic practices have intersected. And I really enjoyed chatting with him about sort of the spiritual aspect of 5-MeO DMT and really comparing some of our experiences and how we've integrated that, the frameworks in which we've been able to integrate and really dissect those experiences, go deeper into them. And yeah, just a really enjoyable conversation where I found a lot of common ground as far as my beliefs and my experiences. And it's always nice to have conversations like that that are very grounded and yet very deep at the same time. So without further ado, check out this wonderful conversation with Henry Winslow, founder of Tricycle Day. All right, Henry Winslow, welcome to the Vital Point podcast. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Jonathan.
Yeah, so we are, the psychedelic world in certain ways is not as big as we think it is sometimes, right? And we have some mutual friends, which is nice. And that really inspired me to want to chat with you more, was hearing your recent conversation with Cam on the Trip Sitting podcast. So appreciate your sharing that story and like the opportunity to continue kind of
Yeah, I had a
talking.
great time talking to Cam, and yeah, I guess you could say I'm going through the podcast circuit now. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So what's that like? Because I know you had your yoga podcast. How long ago was that?
Oh, yes, I did have a yoga podcast. It was called Dharma Talk, and I was doing that while I was a full-time yoga teacher. So it must have been around like 2018 to 2020-ish. Don't have the dates exactly right, but I ran it for 108 episodes, which is
Oh,
an auspicious, significant
auspicious.
number in the yoga tradition. So that felt like a good milestone to wind the series down at.
Yeah, that's cool. That's a nice place to end it for sure. And I always like it, like just being the host. It's so refreshing, like being the guest. Do you find the experience a little bit more exhilarating or light, or what's it like for you? Yeah. And it's always funny like talking about sort of like spiritual stuff. Like I was a guest on a podcast recently, and I spent like an hour just being super hyped up about breath work and like really excited, and I'm talking about all my passions. And then like the last 10 minutes of the episode, the host was like, "Hey, so could you lead us in a little practice?" And I said, "Sure." And then I immediately went into like, hey, like, okay, we're just gonna calm it down a little bit. And It was just like in my head. There's like I'm like, oh, this is totally different than the energy that I've had for the last hour.
Yeah, but that speaks to your ability to have control over that level of energy, which I know is something that, you really celebrate about the practice of breath work itself is
Mm.
nervous system and energy regulation.
Yeah, that is true, and I do enjoy like having that awareness of, oh, we're switching into these different modes, or just how my energy reflects out for what I'm trying to share, and then it kind of ripples out into the space, whether we're in a room with clients, or here where the audience is connecting with us across time and space.
Yeah, totally. Energy is contagious, and some people will talk about how they are empathic or empathetic, but I think to a certain degree, everyone is, whether they're aware of it or not. So when you step into a room and you carry a certain energy, people feel that and respond
Yeah.
to it.
Yeah, it's kind of like reading the room in a different way, right?
It's reading the room and writing the room.
There you go. I like that. Yeah. Okay, so I want to circle back to yoga, but I think it would be remiss just to sort of give you the proper introduction and mention that you are the founder of Tricycle Day, which is an amazing newsletter. I like the way that you summed it up for on Cam's podcast. So could you just maybe give the that elevator pitch here for our audience as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not exactly sure how I phrased it there, but I'll just do it off the cuff here. Tricycle Day is a free twice a week newsletter that covers the top stories in psychedelic research, policy, and business. Those are the three pillars. And like I said, it goes out twice a week. So one of the issues per week is that roundup of the news, and the other is an interview series called Psychonaut POV, on which you are one of the first guests. So between those two things, readers get a nice survey of what's happening, so they can stay in the loop of the psychedelic ecosystem. And then they also get exposed to a breadth and depth of different opinions and perspectives from people who are contributing to the space.
Yeah, it's a great newsletter. I highly recommend it. If you're not already subscribed, you should go and get on it immediately. And we'll definitely post a link on the show page for people to sign up. I think when I did this, when we did our Psychonaut interview together, you had just hit 3,000 subscribers. So quite a lot of growth since then, right?
Yeah, yeah. Tricycle Day is now a little over 1 year old, and as of today has over 38,500 active subscribers. And they're highly engaged, which I'm really proud of and I think is super important.
That's awesome. Yeah, congratulations, and
Thank you.
that's amazing growth. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, it just speaks to it's something that people want. I try to be really receptive to the feedback and not be too attached to my own original interpretation or vision of what I wanted to do because
Mm.
without an audience, like it doesn't really mean anything.
Yeah. Yeah. So how has that changed then since from your sort of original vision?
I mean, well, I will say that my original vision was based on an insight that I still think is true, which is I had become, a consumer of the psychedelic media landscape, you could say,
Right.
and I found that nothing out there was really speaking to an everyday reader. And because psychedelics are suddenly becoming much more popular and mainstreamed, I thought some of the content out there was like very dense or required a certain level of immersion or literacy in the space just wasn't going to speak to this new crowd of people who are coming in looking for information. So if you kind of imagine like a bell curve of potential readers, like it was like this big section in the middle that's not only the biggest, but it's also growing. They were completely underserved. So that's what informed the voice of Tricycle Day, which is to be very lighthearted, easy to understand, dare I say, even entertaining, funny at times. So that really informed the branding and the tone of voice, and that part has remained the same. I think it's really like kind of the cornerstone of what Tricycle Day is. But what's changed is like some of the formatting, some of the different like ways that I've prioritized different information. The Psychonaut POV did not exist in the very beginning. Also, in the very beginning, I thought I was going to do a daily newsletter, which was way too much. Although the
Yeah.
news flow is like sometimes there for that, I was just like thinking, well, this is like, I want to make this my main thing. So I'm going to send a newsletter every day. But then I realized like, that's too much. That's overwhelming for my audience. If this is truly about people who are, psychedelics may not be their most important thing in their life. They just want to stay abreast of what's happening. Like once a week is probably good, or twice a week.
Yeah, it's a good cadence, and I definitely enjoy reading it. I think it's entertaining. I would agree with you on that, and it's also cool. Like I sort of started the episode with like the the psychedelic world isn't as big sometimes as it seems, and so it's super cool to see either people that I know or past podcast guests like show up on the POV. That's always cool, and it's just like, oh yeah, we're a little bit more close knit than maybe than I think sometimes.
Yeah, I think we've had a good amount of overlap.
Yeah, that's awesome. What do you think? I sometimes I get maybe, and maybe it's from the memes that you use a lot rather than the newsletter. But um, do you find a healthy amount of skepticism about like the psychedelic quote unquote renaissance is a good thing to have?
You're asking if I think the skepticism is warranted?
Yeah,
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I mean, these things tend to. We were talking about this before we turned on the recording, but the media tends to sensationalize things. Like,
right.
um, and I'm not going to say I'm not guilty of like turning up the dial on exaggeration or hyperbole because that's kind of part of what I do. But the mainstream media, you have to remember like they're in the business of selling selling clicks. Like they want to get a lot of visibility because then they can sell advertisements. So it's not always about creating the most nuanced take. It's about driving a headline that people will click into. So that kind of manifests as a lot of hype in some cases, or the opposite end of the spectrum, just kind of like the boom and bust of any given thing. So yeah, with psychedelics right now, it feels like we're very much in this hype phase, and we have been for the past couple of years. It does seem that last year, toward the end of the year, there were a couple of events that put some cold water on that. So it'll be interesting to see if 2024 brings a more level-headed discussion.
Mhm. Yeah, I think you mentioned like the majority of the people in that bell curve, and I've often reflected on how sort of disorienting that must be for some people, like that aren't so heavily involved in the psychedelic world, like you and I, where, like for instance, when I was in school, like we had the Dare program, right? And it was
Yeah,
like drugs are bad, like end scene, like full stop.
yeah,
And now, like if you're hearing these, if that's sort of the message that you got for years and years and years, and now you're getting these little sound bites about, how transformative psychedelic work could be, or like you maybe stumble across How to Change Your Mind on Netflix or something like that, or in the social media world where you're getting sound bites that are taken out of context, or things like that. I would imagine that it could be really like sort of a head scratcher for a lot of people.
it could be confusing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, lots of
yeah,
lots of mixed messages there.
yeah. I had Dare growing up too, and I remember even at the time, to be honest with you, I was like a little skeptical of it
Right.
because the whole premise of the like platform was like faulty. I remember they just started the program, like I'll never forget this. They said a drug is something that you consume that changes the way your mind and body works. I was like, that's literally anything that you consume.
Right.
Like food falls under that category. So
Yeah.
if we're defining drug in such an ambiguous way, clearly like a blanket statement about whether it's good or bad, a blanket judgment is going to be misguided.
Yeah. I think for me, I had Dare on the one hand, and then like maybe some of the things that I was asking my parents on the other, and my parents were definitely not the like dare, like they weren't saying like, yeah, go out and do drugs, but you
Yeah.
know, they were also like, well, you know, we had our time, and it's
Yeah.
not all bad, and you know, so it's like cool for me now, like in the last year, both my mom and my dad have had conversations with me about psilocybin, for instance. And especially with my dad, it was like I was sitting there on the phone, like just sort of having this surreal moment of, is this really happening right now? Like, this is not what I would have put on the 2023 bingo card for sure, you know?
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah. I think I had a similar orientation to drugs growing up. I mean, I knew I was aware that my parents had like had their time, as you said, and I remember the first time like I ever even like had a conversation at all related to psilocybin or just mushrooms, magic mushrooms as they were described, was my mom saying, "Well, your dad's the one who sampled the magic mushrooms in college," so I knew it was not totally off limits.
nice. That's awesome. Um, what was your first psychedelic experience?
My first psychedelic experience, if we're not including cannabis, would be a pretty mild dose of magic mushrooms, of psilocybin mushrooms, um, pretty late in like in my late 20s, and I'm 34 now, and I had them in the context of my yoga practice.
Mm.
I was with some friends in Woodstock, New York, so like upstate New York, in a
Yeah,
kind of like, you know, Woodstock, like kind
I've
of
been
a
there.
old hippie town.
Yeah.
Um, and we were just like in a cabin doing yoga for the weekend, and one of my friends brought out a bag of mushrooms, like, let's eat some of these before we practice and see what happens. Um, and it was my first time. It was not anyone else's, I don't think. And it was, like I said, it was pretty mild for me, and you know, I had a nice practice. I think I opened up to maybe some new sensations, like a little bit of awareness in different parts of the body and different asanas. But it certainly wasn't like a kind of like mind unraveling, most profound experience of my life type of thing.
Mm.
But it was interesting enough that it made me dig a little bit deeper and, you know, read How to Change Your Mind and start going down the rabbit hole a bit.
That's cool though that like from the get-go there was some coupling with it, right? Like
Yes.
it's an interesting thing like with mushrooms in particular, and maybe I'd put LSD in this category for some people, where it's like no, it's not always like in a completely therapeutic setting or like ceremonial setting, um but it's like almost in that recreational, you know, sort of space. Like I'll go on Reddit, and there's like a, you know, like a shrooms Reddit, and people will be like, so I'm thinking about like taking like 3 grams and going to the bar with my friends, and I'm like, I mean, you do you, but like that
Yeah,
doesn't
exactly.
sound like a good time to me at all, you know. So it's cool
Yeah.
that you know, had that coupling with the yoga practice from the get-go. That sounds really
Yeah,
neat.
yeah, to each their own, but that certainly is not my relationship to any psychedelic. To me, I'm much more the type of person who wants to be introspective
Right.
during psychedelics. So my favorite times with mushrooms have been either alone, like basically in the dark. I like going into a sensory deprivation tank, like a float
Mm,
tank. I
yes.
love that. And then alternatively, being in nature. I love that too.
What do you think is your sort of sweet spot dose for dosing in the sensory depth tank? Because I've done that as well.
I mean, if I had one at my house and I didn't have to worry about like
Right.
going somewhere and potentially like something going sideways in the transport, then it would probably be a little bit higher. But given the reality of the circumstances, probably like a medium dose, like 3 grams max.
Oh wow. Okay. Yeah, I've done a gram. I've taken a gram in there, but like you said, it's like you're sort of worrying about like the transportation and having to get
Yeah, and what's
out
gonna
and
happen when I come out? Am I gonna
deal
have to
with
talk to
sober
the guy at the
people,
front desk?
right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, having a tank would be like the dream for sure.
Yeah,
Definitely, it's on on that vision board for sure.
Yeah, on that rich life vision board. Let's make it
That's right.
happen.
Yeah. Is that something that you're still doing on a regular basis, like just the sensory deprivation practice?
No, definitely not a regular basis, but I've done it several times, and I think it's a really nice practice.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. It's really cool. Again, I also haven't done it in a while, but I went through sort of a phase where it was like once every week or a couple of weeks, and
Oh wow, yeah,
it was
that's
really neat.
regular.
Yeah. Well, like, yeah, there was a place here in town that had like a membership, and I was like, cool, that sounds great. It sort of kicked off a really transformative portion of my life as well, because it was like right off of my divorce, and I had been kind of hibernating and just sort of hibernating and healing is what I would say, and like processing. And so it was a way that I could like get outside of the house, out of my hibernation cave, but like also not be
But
super
go into a different
social.
hibernation cave.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, those float tanks are like a chrysalis. You like go into the cocoon and come out a different person.
Yeah. Yeah, I really really enjoyed it. And then it was like that led me into the 5MEO experience that like really opened the door to a lot of the things that I'm doing now, that I'm still sort of discovering, like drawing the dots back. So yeah, I think I appreciate the time in for its part in the whole like mandala of what was going on.
Yeah. Can I flip the script for a minute and
Yeah,
ask
yeah,
you?
for sure.
Can you tell me about your 5MEO experience?
What I recall from the actual experience was everything, and I do mean everything, like in the external and in my internal world, like melting away into, it felt like I merged with some sort of like universal like consciousness. Um, what it reminded me of, and I've talked about this with other practitioners, is it reminded me of what the Tibetan Book of the Dead describes as like the death process, and the bardo process, which is the space in between, you know, realms, right? So like as you transition from this life, which is like a dream, into your next incarnation, there's this bardo period, the in between. And that's what it reminded me of. Like not at the time, but like as I've reflected back on it. And then I think a really cool part of the experience was as I started to come back, sort of the image that I had was like a leaky faucet where there was one drop coming out of the faucet at a time. And it was like I was being rebuilt one drop at a time, like one thought, like almost like a meme, right? Because a meme at its core is like the simplest version of an idea, right? Like the lowest denomination of an idea. So it was like just being rebuilt and watching that, and slowly the faucet being turned on a little bit more until like the drips became like a stream, and I was being rebuilt and just sort of watching being rebuilt. Um, and then coming back and just being like, whoa, that was incredible. And then the other thing was like, I after that for probably a couple weeks, I had reactivations like almost every night, and some of the reactivations were just as intense, as the experience itself. So like I had no idea that any of that was going to happen. Like I've had some acid flashbacks. Like things get a little wavy, or like certain color patterns where I'm like, oh, something's not right here, but like nothing to that magnitude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And I love that metaphor, that visual metaphor of the faucet dripping you back into individual existence. Because to me, that just like speaks to this idea that we are coming from that oneness, you know?
Yeah.
It's not that we are discrete from it. It's just we are, you know, one little tiny speck that can easily and does dissolve back into the oneness of universality.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the things that's like continued to be relevant to me is this concept that, uh, from my Buddhist practice, that transition period out of this dream that we in general feel is so solid and not dreamlike. Like we're really taking it seriously. We're really like
Hmm.
taking ourselves seriously and reality seriously, and like, oh, this is solid, right? Like I have a name and I have things that I like and things that I don't like, and like everything is so solid, at least in my mind, right? But then we all are going through this transition period that none of us can avoid, and from the Buddhist perspective is so important for what happens next. And there's
Yeah, you're
so there,
talking about death,
yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's so much potential for things to go sideways in that transition period, right? Because I mean, let's face it, like how many of us are lucid dreaming as opposed to like just sort of, that's like that's one of the examples that it's given, right? Is like you think when you're dreaming and something really intense happens, you wake up and you're like, oh my God, that really intense thing happened. And you might even be like emotionally or mentally impacted by it until you wake up and you're like, oh shit, I was just dreaming. Right. Like, in the 37 Bodhisattva practices, it says like suffering is like the death of a child in a dream. Right. So
Mm.
we're taking these things that are completely illusory on a certain like meta level and like
Yeah.
really taking them seriously.
And yet, even if they are an illusion, even if we can step back and recognize that this is temporary, impermanent, that it's illusory, it's still like the experience, the emotional resonance of it is still very real.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I can't just say like everything's a dream and like just yeah, like get completely ungrounded, right? So like let's just posit that that's true, and then if we only get one shot for this really really important experience of death and transition, but something like 5-MeO DMT is giving us the opportunity to practice and like
100%.
have more than one experience, like that is immensely valuable.
Yes. Yeah. And it's valuable. I think that that value carries forward.
Yeah.
To speak to your point around integration, like, yes, you get a very visceral and like unavoidable experience of death practice with 5-MeO DMT, but after that, you can take that memory with you and implement a more intentional meditative death practice.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so and then it opened up like this whole world to me. Like I had a month after that couple of weeks where I went and I traveled to LA, which is my hometown. I went to some really cool shows there. I went to Movement in Detroit, which is like one of my favorite places to be. It's like a 3-day techno festival in the middle of downtown Detroit. And I went to Minnesota and saw my family for the first time in a couple of years, and even went to a show there. And um, so there was a lot of psychedelic being consumed during that month,
Hmm.
and there was a lot of like interweaving and just like release. And I don't think I realized at the time like how impactful the 5-MeO experience had
Had
been
been.
on that.
Yeah.
But as I've looked back on it, as I've continued to integrate, it's become super super clear,
Yeah.
and just really beautiful. So yeah, I appreciate
Yeah.
you asking. What about you?
Yeah. I appreciate that you kind of like were able to immediately connect it back to a philosophical tradition that you had already been engrossed in,
Mm-hmm.
because that was the same for me. Rather than Buddhism, for me it was like yoga philosophy. And I think that that connection to Bardo is really interesting and is giving me a different way to reflect on my own 5-MeO experiences. But for me, um, the attraction to 5-MeO in the first place was around the idea of being able to access something called samadhi in yoga and Hinduism. Samadhi is the final step, the final destination of the yoga practice. And it's like basically after you've already mastered the body and the mind completely, you're able to let go of those things entirely. And what you described about feeling the external and the internal all melting away into a oneness very much resonates not only with how samadhi is described in the text, but my own experience with 5-MeO as well. And I think you and I probably, I don't want to speak for you, but based on what you said, it sounds like, having that philosophical framework made it a lot, not necessarily easier, but like, I don't know, manageable to make sense of that experience. Because I don't know about you, but for me, there was certainly some terror involved. Not really going into it because I didn't know what to expect, but in those first few moments after ingesting the vapor, everything it's so quick, and it's so powerful. It felt like like the heaviest object in the universe getting attached to my heart and then sucking it down into the center of everything. And I was fortunately it's so fast, like you don't have time to be too scared, but there was some terror there because it felt like dying. It really did, and I wasn't entirely sure if maybe I was dying. And because there was nothing I could do about it, I quickly found the trust to surrender because there was no resisting anyway. So I just said, okay, if I died, then I died. Let's explore this. And as soon as I made that decision to accept, the words in my mind started to unravel, and I could no longer think in English language, like, or even abstract thoughts, like the mind disintegrated. But the last thing that my mind said to me was, you made it. Nothing else matters. This is the purpose. Like, this is why you exist, is to experience this. And I felt like that was just, the most powerful, profound gift I could ever receive in life.
Mm, yeah. How has that continued to kind of ripple out into your life?
Um, Kind of like what you said before around like how we take everything so seriously
Yeah.
in our solid 3D life.
Uh-huh.
Like I still take my life seriously for sure, and I think that we should all like have values and have conviction around things and care. We should all care, but it takes some of the pressure off to know that this reality is not everything. It's not even close to
Right.
everything.
Yeah. I often think back to have you seen the first Doctor Strange movie?
No.
There's this line when he goes searching for like the answers to his, his condition, and like when he finds the first like wizard that he trains with, she says it's Tilda Swinton, and she says like you've been looking through reality through like a keyhole. So it's like this idea that like we're basing our reality on this little tiny keyhole when you could really just open the door and it would be like this
Yeah.
totally different experience, right?
Yeah. Open the door and step through.
Yeah, yeah. A good thing to kind of touch back on is, you mentioned like having that panic initially and being able to relax into it. And I guess in my work, what I've seen and what I've experienced myself is that the majority of the time, like certainly there are traumas that occur in the psychedelic space, but I would say the majority of what we call a quote unquote bad trip, I think, and this is just my opinion, it are those moments where we are resisting and we're not willing to like actually let go and just go with whatever is happening. And so the bad trip is the resistance. It's what's happening as like the mind or spirit tries to fight whatever's coming up.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. It raises a lot of deeper questions around like free will and faith, though, because like
Mm,
we all have different predispositions to willingness to surrender. And,
yeah.
who's to say that it's really like that person's fault that they resisted? Like
Yeah.
maybe their mind has just such a grip that it's much more difficult for that person.
Yeah.
Um, in which case, like, is it the medicine? Is it the person? Is it the container? It's hard.
For me, the way that I've kind of integrated that or continuing to integrate it is how important set and setting and dosage are. It's why I do the work that I do, right? Where it's like, hey, it's the psychedelic experience isn't limited to like this 6 hour like window where you're actually ingesting medicine. The real integration starts with preparation and continues after the experience. And what are the things that you have in your toolkit to help you process that and to help you like sort of understand or explore or even just be open to like to that surrender experience when it comes up, right?
Yeah.
It's why
Yeah.
breath work is so important to me, because it's like you get you literally get experience with that surrender. In fact, one of my mentors literally calls breath work going to the surrender gym, because
Yeah.
his whole thing is like, if you breathe, you're going to have a peak experience at some point, right? But oftentimes what
Mhm.
happens as people begin to make breath work their practice rather than just an experience is they go through a session where there's not a peak experience, and how we respond to that. Like, what do you do when it's just sort of boring and you're breathing for an hour, not like you're shot out into the universe? And I've had those nights with ayahuasca as well, right? Like, I've had nights where it's just like the bliss and unity experience and like visions and colors and all kinds of like really intense stuff. And then there's nights where I'm just sitting there and I'm with myself and my shitty thoughts and my shitty attitude and like my humanness. And it sucks because I'm like, where is Disneyland? Like, I want to go back to Disneyland right now. I
Hmm.
want the colors. I want the, you know, the beautiful experience. And the medicine's like, no, actually, we're just gonna explore like how you're not the greatest human being all the time.
Yeah, and that takes an element of surrender too, to accept that that's what you're supposed to, that's the experience you're supposed to have at that given time.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've heard sort of similar experiences in the breath work, like it's like, especially when people have really big peak experiences right out of the gate, which most people do. And
Yeah, which
then,
is pretty common.
right, right. And then it's like that time where it doesn't happen. Like, how do you respond to that? Like, are you able to lean into it and be with whatever's coming up when it's not the love and light and bliss and like
Hmm.
unitive experience, when it's just like when you're there with yourself and maybe a part of yourself that like isn't the most comfortable, like having more experience with that, I think is really, really great.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it sounds like for you, like some of that resourcing is coming from your yoga practice.
Yeah, definitely. I think yoga is a great integrative practice because it offers it like checks a lot of boxes.
Yeah.
You get physical movement, which can be incredibly grounding after somewhat destabilizing has a negative connotation, but something that takes you out of your body and takes you into more of an ethereal space. To get back into your body can be really healthy and restore like some assurance and confidence.
Yeah.
And it also has the meditative component. That's also part of yoga, is to sit and witness your thoughts as like a third party observer. And the final piece is what I was talking about before, which is just having a sort of esoteric framework for understanding, or at least like processing what you just experienced from a psychedelic journey. And I think that, not like, it doesn't have to be yoga, but any sort of spiritual tradition that gives you language to articulate what happened can be very helpful. Just to be able to express something out loud, or even in your mind's voice, to be able to like talk about something to yourself or to others, makes you feel like you have more of a handle on it.
Yeah. What advice would you give somebody that like is curious about the yogic path and wants, because I think what you're describing sounds to me like a little bit more um, involved and holistic than just like showing up to a class where you're just going to go through a bunch of different poses.
Yeah. I mean, yoga asana, I think, is a great place to start for pretty much anybody who's interested in yoga because it's really accessible. Um, it's out there, there are classes everywhere, but you should just know going into it that, yeah, that is just a kind of like glimpse of the full yoga practice. But I think what's nice about it is like, some of these popular yoga studios and gyms, they try to integrate the other elements. They teach a little bit of yoga philosophy in between the poses, and sometimes you'll begin with some pranayama or breath work, um, or end with a little bit of meditation. And even if you don't actually approach those modalities like explicitly, you get an element of meditation just from doing the movements and being focused on like proprioception and interoception. So you kind of get it in one package.
Yeah.
I don't have anything against like popular yoga. I think it's great. I think that it's a lot better than not doing yoga.
Right, right, yeah. It's just I think that was one of the things I wanted to ask you is as a yoga novice, my impression is that the yoga world is much bigger than maybe the fitness aspect that we sort of tend to see in the West here.
Yeah, that's for sure. The yoga fitness in the West is very much shaped by the desires and interests of people in the West. And people want to get in shape. People want to look good naked. So, if you can get into a class and they're selling the promise of getting in shape and feeling better in your body, but you just happen to get some secondary effects that were not part of what pulled you into the class, then why not? That's even better.
Right. And I think if I'm remembering your conversation with Cam correctly, that was kind of your experience.
Yeah, for me, like I wanted to do tricks. I had been a springboard diver, so like I had like an acrobatic background. I was always like thought it was cool to do flips and twists, and yoga is not exactly that, but you learn how to balance on your hands and put your body in interesting positions, and that was exciting to me. But it was immediately apparent, like I'm talking first class, that there was a lot more to it in terms of what I was getting back.
Yeah, so just being able to drop in to your body as you're going through these poses is creating
Yeah,
some more
I mean, people
awareness.
talk about like flow state, right? It's like this idea when you are so immersed in what you are doing that like the distractions fall away and you enter like a different headspace. That's what I get reliably from my yoga practice. It's it's hard to describe it without having a frame of reference if you've like never had something like that, but I think people get it from surfing. People get it from doing things that they like really love. But I'm like focused, I'm dialed in, but also at the same time my mind is totally like it's like vacant but focused at the same time, and
Yeah.
because of that like that space that's opened up, it's like my subconscious is able to bubble up to the surface and I get all these like creative ideas, I get insights, I get downloads, um, and it's effortless.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like I mean, the way I'm relating to it is there's also a lack of distraction that we normally have, right? Where usually the attention is turned outward somehow, whether it's looking at a screen or thinking about work or, chores, bills, family, all the things that we have, kind of on our minds. And having a dedicated time and practice where you're dropping into yourself and you have that awareness turned inward just creates a lot more spaciousness.
It's essential for me. I mean, this day and age, there are so many things that are competing for your attention. And we're talking about like trillion-dollar companies that have spent millions, billions of dollars hyper engineering algorithms that are designed to like hijack your dopamine system and keep you looking and pulling your attention in different directions. So
Yeah.
to like create circumstances in your life that are regular and consistent to step away from that to me is like a foundation of my health.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been interesting for me as like someone that's meditated for a long time to just notice, in the last few years being an entrepreneur and having my own business and running that off social media to some degree, like just noticing the changes in my mind and like sort of the desire to reach for the phone that wasn't there a few years ago. And the technology is so disruptive, right? We really don't know what it's doing in the long term.
Yeah, and there is some research that's been coming out that's kind of scary.
Yeah. So like you're saying, to have some practices to balance that out seems really important for sure.
I think the important thing to know there is that like you can't win the fight through sheer willpower because like I said, I mean there's so much money and resourcing going into making these things addictive that you have to like create the circumstances where it's impossible to use them,
Right.
you know? Because you won't win that fight consistently if it's just about like I'm not gonna look. I'm not gonna look.
Yeah. Yeah, it's why I'm always recommending like meditate first thing in the morning. Like get out of bed, pee, drink water, meditate. Do
Make
not
it a
let yourself,
non-negotiable.
right, do not let yourself grab the phone or get distracted, because that's just it's a losing battle.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've got to be responsible for for yourself and finding those methods that are going to put you into that space. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's a wonderful place to be when you look at it from that perspective, right? Like no one's coming to save you. You got to save yourself.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll say about it is like it doesn't need to be a chore. You know, you can
No.
find like once you've experienced like the relief
Right.
that comes from giving yourself that indulgence, like if you think about it as a gift that you're giving yourself and allow yourself to like indulge in it,
Yeah,
it becomes something that you want to do, not something that you're forcing yourself to do.
absolutely. That's super key. I thank you for mentioning that, because that is really true. And I find that with my practices and my clients as well. It's like I'm always recommending people start really small, rather than saying like, someone will say like, well, what do you do? And I'm like, well, okay,
Yeah, don't
let's,
worry about what I do.
right, because if I tell you like to, do 30 minutes of meditation in the morning and 30 minutes of breath work every night, which is what I do, like just as a for instance, you're probably going to give up like after a few days. Like, but if you started with 5 minutes and started to feel the benefit of that, and then that leads you into 10 minutes or 15 minutes, something like that, or a second session, or, like you went to one yoga class, you felt really great, and then you're going to like go and sign up for a membership or commit to a weekly practice, something like that. Like that's so much better than just giving someone like this like blank, like, oh, this is what you should do, or and yet we're bombarded by that, right? Like it's marketing. It's like, oh, this
Yeah.
is the solution. Or I see people that are breathwork facilitators like putting down meditation, or meditation teachers like putting down breathwork, and it's like such a
Yeah,
weird,
it's my way
right,
only.
right. It's such a interesting space to be in. Even like for instance, and maybe this is a good segue into talking about the course that we're coming out with, but like, like even there's, some particular breath work, the psychedelic breath work that we do in the course, that is very similar to like a very popular branded type of breath work, but like that person didn't invent that breath work. They're just pulling from pranayama techniques and, different ancient yogic traditions, and like packaging it, branding it, and saying, this is mine. Right. And it was something that I
Yeah.
found really interesting when I got involved in breath work, was like, well, how can I, how can I say that I'm like, this is my intellectual property with the way that you're breathing?
Yeah.
It's like, no, like we're rediscovering ancient wisdom. And
Yeah, totally. I remember one thing that someone I met early on in my like psychedelic community introductions, he said to me, "There's nothing new under the sun,"
right.
and I always remember that quote, and like it like rings in my head. Yeah, the intellectual property can be like you can own the way that you market and package something, but yeah, we've been doing the same thing as civilizations for millennia.
Yeah. And as I mentioned, like in the course, one of the things that has always been really interesting to me is when you think about, let's just take four, pretty ancient cultures, Sanskrit, Chinese, Greek, and Hebrew. The word for spirit and breath is the same in all of those, in all four of those. Like, I don't think that that's an accident, right? So it's like we're rediscovering things that people have known for a long time, and maybe it's just now it's the right time to reconnect with that, in contrast to this sort of hyper focused, hyper attention, like you said, sort of dopamine jacking environment that we find ourselves in now.
Yeah, even the romance languages too, right?
Yeah,
It's like inspire is like comes from the word for inhale
yeah,
in the romance languages.
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I keep tiptoeing around it, but we have a course that's coming out soon. Get high on your own supply. In fact, if you're listening to this podcast, the pre-sales are open, and you should definitely check it out. This is Henry and I's, I guess, technically second collaboration, right? Because you invited me to the integration club last
Yeah, and
year.
if you include the interview, it's the third.
Right, right, yeah. So
We go
that's right.
way back to January 2023.
I mean, for you, I think like there's been a lot of growth in that, since that time, which is really cool. So, uh,
I'm sure there's been a lot of growth for you too.
yeah, in my own way. So I appreciate you saying that. But yeah, the course is Get High on Your Own Supply. It's how to use breath work for your psychedelic preparation, integration, and to reach the psychedelic space even without working with other medicines, just being able to connect with a non-ordinary state of consciousness through the breath. There's like 5 different guided practices. There's over 3 hours of me talking about breath work and how amazing it is for your preparation and integration. And it's definitely, I would say the target market for that course is probably listening to this podcast right now. So
Yeah.
um, we'll put
Yeah.
we'll put a link to that on the show page. But if you're just listening to the podcast, you can go to breath.tricycleday.com. And
That's right.
if you
Yeah.
use the code Jonathan, my name Jonathan at checkout, there's a discount code that should be applied if you are getting in during the first couple of weeks.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
definitely try that
Eh,
code.
Yes, try it. Try it. Hopefully it still works. And if it doesn't, you can reach out to one of us and maybe we can make it work for you.
Yeah. I appreciate you, wanting to collaborate with me. Like I feel really grateful, slightly humbled that out of the whole, field of folks that you wanted to work with me. So thank you for that opportunity.
Seriously, my pleasure. When we first met, I got a really good impression from you, and that's why I wanted to keep doing things with you. I think that what I really liked about your approach is, like me, you really value explaining things. You're not just about direct experience. You're providing that foundational knowledge too. So, one thing that you did not mention in your quick little briefing about the course is that you do like a lot of upfront education around why this stuff works,
Yeah.
and what the different types of breath work are. I think a lot of people will probably jump into this course because they want to have that psychedelic transformative experience. And yes, you can certainly get that from the information and practices provided in the coursework. However, I don't want to undersell the more quote unquote basic breathing that you're teaching in there too, because getting in tune with your internal state, your nervous system, as a practice for self awareness and then also for regulation, like that's really valuable stuff that doesn't seem as sexy or magical, but I
Right.
would argue maybe that is more practical,
I
and practical is magical.
I would argue that as well. Like, and that's why I included it, right? Because like think about the experiences we've talked about during this conversation. These are um, potentially disintegrating experiences, right? Like things are kind of unraveling, and having the capacity to sit with that and to keep your breath, to keep your presence, and to be able to open and not be resistant to this pretty big, intense experience, I think is super, super valuable um, for psychedelic work. And maybe not if like your intention is like you just want to go and like giggle with your friends in the woods or something, or like, go to the bar like we were talking about earlier, heaven forbid. But for intentional psychedelic work, for people that are approaching these medicines with reverence and with the intention of transformation or healing or addiction, PTSD, like the things that I get really excited, as far as potential. And also, like, this is how it's worked for me. Like I've gone, for instance, and I have friends of mine that have said like, well, you'll go through another cycle of this, and it'll change directions. But I've gone from like regularly ingesting 5 grams or more and like just sort of hanging on and enjoying the ride for the most part. um at one point a couple of years ago, the mushrooms like basically said you could start taking less and you're going to get more out of it. And I didn't listen at first, and I got like my butt handed to me. um and then I started to pull it back, but sit in a more intentional way, like in a more meditative or introspective way. And I feel like I get more out of those experiences than with the higher doses. So there's something to being in that therapeutic zone with presence, with the capacity to like have awareness of what's happening in my body, and the nervous system capacity to be with that. Because I think some of what we learn doing like somatic work or nervous system work is that um, there's a sensation, and I'm guessing you would agree with this from the yoga perspective as well. There's sensations that we feel, and then we make a meaning and a thought around those sensations, and the, having the ability to step back from that and experience a sensation as just that, or see the thought or the meaning that you're making come up around that, and being able like, oh well, hold on, what if I didn't automatically assign this particular meaning to this experience? Like, what would that be like? There's a lot of healing and transformation that goes on within that particular flavor of experience.
Yeah, I think what you're describing is also quite similar to this idea of like uh, injecting space in between an input and one's response or reaction to it, which is at the root of a lot of like the healing that people can have with psychedelics for addictions, chemical dependencies or behavioral dependencies. Right, as you get that distance to be able to watch how you respond to something and choose a different course. Um, but I totally agree with you around like dosing and intensity of experience. Like even if we talk about, we both had 5-MeO experiences and we both had experiences with psilocybin, I would say that, 5-MeO was incredibly profound and transformative for me. However, from a therapeutic standpoint, it's so powerful that you almost like can't even work with it. Whereas with psilocybin, like you're there for it, your ego hasn't dissolved. So some things can come up that may be difficult and you're actually able to engage with them. And so if we follow that spectrum even one step further, I think that's, a place where you can reasonably, assign breath work. It's like you have total control over the gas and brake pedals,
Yeah.
you can go higher, you can go lower. It's not like you bought the ticket, you're taking the ride. It's like I'm deciding where I want to be with this. And for that reason, I think it has a tremendous amount of therapeutic potential.
Yeah, I've talked to so many people like after like a big breathwork session, and like had like, I'm like, yes, this is my experience as well, where they say that was incredibly close and reminiscent of being in the psychedelic space, but with more clarity and more
Hmm.
presence. And
Yeah.
that is just so valuable. Like that was what hooked me into it in the beginning, was like, I'm in this space and I'm kind of looking around and I'm like, Oh, I know where this is. Like I've been here before, but in a different, like a slightly different way. Like the insights are there, the downloads are there, the clarity is there, but I'm not also like on this roller coaster of the, well, whatever molecule I ingested, kind of
Yeah, you're
like
not intoxicated.
right, right. And and I work with other people where it's like that's their curiosity. They're like, hey, I read How to Change Your Mind, or like somebody told me about these medicines, but I'm hesitant at this moment for a myriad of reasons, whether it's legality or I just don't feel ready for it, or I want to titrate my way into it. And but breath work, I think I could handle that. And I'm like, yeah, because before you strap a rocket pack to your back and blast off into outer space, like let's get into the atmosphere. Let's have that experience with the surrender, so that when you're working with a medicine, like you have that frame, you have that context. Oh, this is what's happening. This is what I need to do, as far as just relaxing into it and just being the witness.
Yeah, so in that sense, it can be a really valuable preparatory tool,
Yes.
and I think for obvious reasons, it can be really valuable for integration too. It allows you to kind of like go back
Yep.
into that medicine space and revisit some of the things that maybe you left open-ended. But I think even more than that, it's like this can be a practice in and of itself. It doesn't
Absolutely.
hinge on psychedelic use in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. And I appreciate that you gave me the ability to lean into that psychedelic framework a little bit more than maybe I do, because it's like, and maybe this is my own growth place as a coach, but I'm not at this point in time, like I'm not excluding people that from my coaching practice that like aren't working with psychedelics in tandem to breath work, but there definitely are a lot of people that are doing that, right? So it's like, um, I also work at a treatment center where nobody's working with psychedelics, and and I've seen people that have had disintegrating experiences with psychedelics. So that's another reason why I think the integration piece is so important, because it's not just the medicine itself; it's like how are you working with that medicine, and yeah. So it's nice though to like to put that course together and to really get this like framework that I've been working on with people into a different platform and different medium that people can continue to like explore on their own. I think you're getting a lot of my experience really over like the last 5 years. Um, so, you don't have to necessarily like fall into all the pitfalls that I did, or like, go down all the different rabbit holes that I did. I've really laid out a pretty complete path that's really worked for me, as far as overcoming a really dysfunctional marriage and some active alcoholism, and just not feeling good about my life in general. And that's where I started my path, was like I got some things I need to change, and I'm looking for answers, and so you're getting a lot of that experience and the things that have worked for me and work for other people, work for the people that I work with. So I'm really excited to finally get this baby out and to be able to share it. And I appreciate that we get to do it together through Tricycle Day.
Same here, same here. So thank you for putting it all out there. I'm stoked that we got to do this together, and I'm really excited to see what people think of the course, how they respond to it. I know it's gonna like unlock a lot of breakthroughs for people. So I'll just let people know the name of the course one more time. It's called High on Your Own Supply, and you can pre-register. You can pre-enroll for the course at breath.tricycleday.com and use the code Jonathan to get a sweet discount.
Awesome. The way I like to end the show is just asking you what your vital point is. So the name of the show kind of came from a Buddhist idea. Shantideva, for instance, said, "It's not. Is it appropriate for me to get mad at my doctor if all I do is look at the bottle of medicine and I don't take it?" So the vital point is that you have to apply whatever it is. You got to do the yoga practice. You can't. You're not going to get the benefit of a yoga practice from watching a YouTube video or listening to a podcast. You actually have to go and apply the thing, right? So that's my vital point. Is there anything that's alive to you, either from this conversation or just in your life, in your work in general, that you'd like to share with the audience as your vital point?
So vital point is like my like key message, like
Yeah,
the thing that I want people to take away.
yeah,
The first thing that's coming up for me is, and I don't know if it's necessarily tied directly to what we were talking about, but I'll just,
yeah,
speak from the heart because it's
totally.
what came up is do the thing. Just whatever it is that you have been like, you've had a whisper that's been telling you like you should be doing something or you want to do something, but for whatever reason, like you've held yourself back from doing procrastination because you want it to be perfect. You want all the circumstances to be aligned, the stars to be aligned for you to go do it. That never happens. The only way that happens is because you decide. So my vital point is do the thing.
I love it. I wouldn't be here talking with you about this course if I waited for it to be perfect. Definitely had to apply that vital point. So thank you for sharing that. I can definitely relate and agree. Well, Henry Winslow, thank you so much for being here on the Vital Point. Thank you for just being a friend and for the connections that we made. And I appreciate the friendship that's continuing to unfold there. Definitely subscribe to Tricycle Day. Um, and if you don't follow him on social media, you're missing out on like some of the greatest psychedelic memes that are around at this point. So definitely connect into that network if you haven't already. And hope we get to do this again sometime.
Yeah, yeah, and I appreciate the friendship as well. I look forward to doing more stuff together, and hopefully we'll get to see each other in person again one of these days.
That's right. I sincerely hope you found value and inspiration in this episode. If it struck a chord with you, I'd be grateful if you took a moment to leave a review. It's a simple, cost free way to show support and help more like minded people discover the show. Also, super excited to share the course with you we just talked about in the episode. That's High on Your Own Supply, my first course with Tricycle Day, my first course that I'm releasing at all. So thank you to Henry for having the trust and faith in me to get my vision out into the world. So you can go to breath.tricycleday.com to purchase the course. Use the code Jonathan at checkout for a discount. Thank you so much for tuning into the podcast. Until next time, remember, it's not just the method you choose or the pace at which you travel. The vital point is to consistently show up for yourself and practice. As the saying goes, it's not the destination, but the journey that truly matters. And I'm honored to accompany you on yours. Please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm just a email, DM, or review away. Let's journey, grow, and transform together. Thanks so much for tuning in. Thanks so much to Henry Winslow of Tricycle Day for being on the show. Definitely check out and subscribe to Tricycle Day as well. Until our next episode, keep exploring, keep growing, and above all, keep practicing because that's the vital point.